So I welcome you all for this part 4 of the Wellness Center experience of COVID-19. This is totally dedicated to home isolation cases. Some of the challenges that we encountered in this COVID pandemic so far, some interesting home isolation cases, and what we actually face on the ground. Uh, In this program, we'll be asking Dr. Kameshwar Rao to give us a data analysis of complete blood count, which was done in COVID-19 patient. So he'll be joining us in between during this presentation to give us what he found on that analysis. So we start with first slide is it's a disclaimer that please follow the prevailing guidelines. We are not the experts to tell you anything about treatment of COVID-19. We are just sharing our experience. So whatever state, central government guidelines exist on this COVID pandemic, you please follow that. We will be adding something more to these guidelines to make your job easier to manage COVID-19 patients in home isolation. So if Dr. Rao is joined, he can take over from this slide, or I'll continue with the rest of the presentation. So what we have found in our Wellness Center 5 data analysis.
Yeah, Dr. Dadge, I am here actually. I joined.
Oh, so you can take over this, sir, but I'll just describe this slide that
Okay.
there is some correlation that we found at CBC parameters and symptoms. So if I find, say, RBC, WBC, and platelets all are affected, then the patient is more symptomatic. So it is proportional to number of cell lines is proportional to amount of symptoms that a patient has. Patient who has CRP of more than 40 anytime during first week, he usually goes for admission or requires oxygen. And any patient who shows a thrombocytopenia with a high CRP likely requires a admission. So there are many studies being done on complete blood count because that is the simplest analysis that you can have. And this is one study that eosinophil count can be an indicator of severity. So we found a lot of eosinopenia in the COVID-19 patient. So that can be one of the indicator. So I'll request Dr. Rao to take over from this slide onwards.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Dadge. Good evening, everyone. I'll just share my screen. I think Dr. Dadge, you have to enable screen sharing.
Yeah, I'll do that. Now you can.
Yeah.
All right.
Is it visible, the screen?
Yeah, it is visible.
Okay. Yeah. Good evening, everyone, once again. So I'll be sharing with the analysis of CBC reports. This data is largely, in fact, entirely gathered by Dr. Dadge and his team at WC5.
In fact, it is by all doctors of the WC5, Dr. Rangari, Dr. Murli, and Dr. Sarita. There were some other doctors who also contributed, Dr. Bhavsar from CAM dispensary and Dr. Trupti and Dr. Shirsagar from Wellness number 2. Their cases also included in this presentation.
Right. So you are the better judge of the credits. Yeah. So I'll be focusing mainly on why we should focus on hemograms, and I'll just share with you a brief literature survey that I came across, and followed by the analysis. Why basically focus on hemograms? you're still seeing the slides
Yeah, same slide.
that
Yeah.
I'm sharing? Yeah, okay. Okay. The hemogram is the simplest lab test available even in a low-cost healthcare facility, and it is easily obtainable and inexpensive lab test. Uh, we know that definitive diagnostic tests such as RT-PCR are costlier and they are not immediately available to us. So when a patient comes to us on day one, so whether he is a suspect or not, uh, RT-PCR is not immediately available. So it takes time to get the results, and precious time is lost in terms of isolating the patient or quarantining. Uh, in fact, study of large samples on CBC reports, the hemograms, we can actually apply machine learning algorithms. We can ask the computers to learn from the data and present what are the patterns. And we can actually develop predictive models, which cases require ICU admissions, and so that we can make preparations for such an event. So my analysis is basically focused on to identify is there a pattern among these CBC that can signal towards suspicious COVID-19 cases. So before that, I'll just present a brief literature survey. So this is a Eugene Pan and Vanessa Chong hematologic parameters in patients with COVID-19 infections. They studied 69 cases in NCID Singapore, and they observed that severe leukopenia with a median value of less than 4,000 and high LDH among ICU admissions. Second one is hemogram data as a tool for decision making in COVID-19 management, Eduardo Avila et al. So they've studied 510 hemogram reports, and they developed models that can predict COVID-19 positive cases in terms of RT-PCR positive. Risk stratification of hospitalized COVID-19 patients studied by Yang Mi et al. And it's published in Lancet September 2020. So they have studied the COVID-19 cases along with the influenza cases, and they published the results, basically the hemogram results. And they found that lymphopenia is correlated with worse prognosis in COVID-19 cases. Again, eosinopenia and COVID-19 studied by Dr. Mohammad Jama, infectious disease specialist at Brooklyn, New York. So he compared hemograms of COVID-19 patients with influenza cases again, and 60% of cases among these COVID-19 cases had eosinopenia, whereas only 16% had eosinopenia in influenza. So after that literature survey, we come to our analysis. I got 217 cases, the hemogram, the reports, among which there were some missing parameters and missing data. So I cleaned it up, and I came across 157 presentable cases where we have the complete blood reports. So these are the summary stats. So among the 157, we have 101 male cases and 56 female. And among the positive cases, mind you, throughout this presentation, the red color indicates positive and green indicates negative. I purposely put it that way because it's a warning for the positive cases. So among the positive cases, males 66 and females 41, again 60-40 ratio, which we have seen, which we have heard. And this is the age distribution which we have in positive and negative cases. Since most of our dispensary cases we get pensioners, it's no surprising that we have between 50 and 65 years maximum number of cases among positive category, and a few cases below 20 also. Whereas in negative cases, again the negative reports, we have all age groups, and even we have less than 20 years also in some cases here. So what is the pattern that is shown in these reports? So here the positive cases, this is the white blood cell count. Although this 18,000 is one isolated case, which is an outlier, also this 12,000. But most of the cases are in positive category. are around, I mean, starting with around 2000 and going up to 12,000 uh, levels. In negative cases also, we do see uh, cases about 2,500 to almost up to 16,000. So not much to differentiate here, except that the median value, if you see in positive cases, is tending towards lower than 6,000, somewhere between 4 to 6,000. Whereas in negative cases, the median value tends to be higher, close to 7,000. Then comes the neutrophils. Again, a very high range. The median cases, median value of neutrophils in positive cases is about 65, whereas in negative cases, we found the median value to be close to 70. But again, not much of differentiation here. Although you can see the positive cases have a very high values in some of these positive cases, even reaching up to 85, 90. This is a pattern in lymphocytes. Again, the positive cases have a median value of around 25, whereas in negative cases should be around 20, 22 is the median value. Here comes the eosinophils, which the studies were there. We are talking about eosinophilia. Well, as you see the distribution per se, in negative cases, you may find the median value close to 2, whereas in positive cases, the median value is above 2. Whereas the concentration, if you see, they are all more tending towards the lower side here, around 4 and less. That is in the positive cases. Here comes the monocytes, again, which is we see very high values in some of these cases, with a median of around 7. And platelets, again, not much to differentiate between positives and negatives. Having done this, okay, and this is the hemoglobin, again, not much of difference, except that the red cell distribution with RDW, in positive cases, we find very high variation and higher levels. Having done that, what we did was we grouped these cases. More than 10,000 into one category, between 6 to 10,000 in another category, and less than 6,000 into another category. Because this is basing on the median values what we have seen. So if you see here, less than 6,000, about 62% of the total cases. Again, this is the entire 157 cases. Because we are not looking at just negative and positive here, because we are looking for the pointers. So as pointers, we see in 62% of the cases, we see less than 6,000 values, and between 6 to 10,000, we see 41%. Eosinophil range, again, although that median value in the previous slide was not clear enough, here you can see a very clear evidence that the positive cases, if you just look at the eosinophilia among the cases, total cases, you see 67% have values between 1 and 4, and less than 1 values are in 31% of the cases. So together, between 1 and 4, you see the maximum cases in the positive category. This is again the monocyte range. More than 6, we find in 65% of the total cases. So those are accounting for the positive cases. This is again the lymphocyte range. Less than 30, we have 63% of the total cases, and 30 to 40 in 37% cases. In the negative category, less than 30 is in 38% cases. This is again the neutrophil range. Here, I don't find much of significance here in between these ranges, 60 to 70, and more than 70. All of them are equally distributed. So, what does this indicate? A previous slide may not be, independently or individually may not be indicating anything. But if we just look at only low eosinophil and high monocyte count, we can account for 69% of positive cases. I mean, among the total cases, 69% are positive. So that means clearly low eosinophil and high monocyte in combination, it raises a high index of suspicion. And when I add the RDW to that, the suspicion goes even higher to 80%. So just by looking at low eosinophil, high monocyte, and high RDW, we can uh, predict up to 80% that the case may be positive. So what are the key takeaways? Simple hemograms can give important signals towards raising a suspicion of COVID-19. Low eosinophil, high monocyte, and high RDW together can be important indicator. But this is a case of just 157 samples. What we are looking for is generally the samples in the range of 3 to 5,000 samples. If we can collect and analyze, then definitely we can run some machine learning algorithms with better identification of patterns. Towards this, I think I suggest I would welcome a multicentric approach among the interested cities who can share their hemogram reports. We can come on a common platform and do some wonderful studies. So that's all my analysis on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Kameshwar. This was excellent insight. I think I don't have any, I have not read any paper which gives so much of insight into CBC and gives a inference based on the combination of different findings. So definitely we'll take this forward as cases will be coming, and we'll go ahead with the rest of the presentation. So everybody can see this my slide. Dr. Kamesh, are you able to see my slides?
Yeah.
Yes. All right. Okay.
I can see you.
All right. So I will take to the most important topic today is challenges in home isolation. So this is from the revised guidelines of home isolation of 2nd July, that it centers around mainly respiratory monitoring, that hypoxia and tachypnea, cyanosis as one of the indication for discontinuing home isolation or seeking medical attention when the patient is in home isolation. So there is only one criteria of slurred speech or seizure tells you that something neurologically happening with the patient, then that patient should seek medical attention in home isolation. So what are the pitfalls that we found in home isolation so far? Some of the patients we found that they do only RT-PCR and go home in isolation, and there is no risk assessment. So these patients are very dangerous for home isolation. So you just do RT-PCR and go for home isolation based on the age or and absence of comorbidity. No, it should not be encouraged at all. Some of the patients do not know what is the first day of their symptoms. So this is a very critical information required for the management of home isolation. If you somehow mistaken on the day of the first day of the symptom, your whole calculation will go wrong. We will tell you how it is. No home isolation guidelines tell you that what laboratory reports are to be monitored or how they are supposed to be monitored. So basically, mostly these monitoring are clinical, mainly the resting, saturation, urine output, and pulse rate. Those who have filled in our NIC module will agree to that. These are the 3 parameters that they ask. There is no blood pressure monitoring in the home isolation because we can't expect patient to suddenly start learning how to take blood pressure. Monitoring frequency, although it is loosely defined once in a day or twice in a day, but what is the best frequency? We don't know that. With the home isolation cases and sudden emergence of these guidelines of telemedicine, Everybody has started using this telemedicine. Even the patient is using and doctors are using. Nobody had previous experience, a good experience of using these different gadgets or internet for exchanging medical information. So suddenly we have started using this telemedicine, and limitations of this telemedicine are not understood by both the parties, both doctors and the patient. So this is one of the pitfall. And practical solution to some of the non-medical issues has not been discussed in these guidelines. So we'll come to know what are the practical problems in home isolation. Continuing with other pitfalls, many patients come to know about their comorbidities during health checkup. We know all these things. So many get diabetes detected during routine health checkup when they are asymptomatic. So same can happen with a home isolation case if that patient goes to the isolation without doing other blood tests. Patients who are on insulin and glimepiride, especially glimepiride is a very notorious drug in this home isolation. We have come across a problem in few patients because of glimepiride. So this is a very important drug to be looked after in home isolation. We rely on resting SpO2 for the assessment, but resting hypoxia is a late sign. Of course, there are machine errors, fake pulse oximeters, well documented by everyone now. And these, if they show correct if they don't show correct SpO2, the case may go wrong. So this is one of the pitfall. Do you do respiratory examination in home isolation? Certainly not. We really relying mainly on the SpO2 and patient symptoms. But this respiratory examination can be done, and there is no guideline on how to do that. Usually the first week is a silent week in home isolation. Nothing happens much except for few fever, body ache issues. Usually it is a silent week, nothing happens. So one of the case described about sleep apnea, suspected sleep apnea in a WhatsApp group. It is one of the very important risk factor, and these sleep apnea patients, if are undetected, it is a very strong risk factor for a severe COVID-19. And many of our patients have undetected sleep apnea. So this is an example how your case may land into trouble. And that is why we get sudden deaths in the home isolation cases. Now we'll take the real cases that we came across, and we will start with the polling. So keep your link ready. And once the slide comes up for voting, please vote. So this is a case one, young doctor who was under us, RT-PCR positive. So he had his assessment and went into isolation. But the problem was no electricity in home for more than 30 hours. So, and his mobile was about to get discharged and he had no power backup. So in such, this is one of the situation that you can land up, and doctors and the patients are not aware of. And we learned in that case. So what would you do in such a case? Would you continue home isolation, discontinue home isolation, or you will seek to establish alternative communication? So you can vote. So what you would do in this such scenario. I hope you can vote on the link. It takes time to come up on the screen. You can skip your name if you don't want to. I'll describe again the case scenario. Is a young doctor who does not have electricity during isolation. So whether you should continue, discontinue, or seek to establish. So I think the answer most of the people want is seek to establish alternative communication. So this doctor was provided with a power bank by through one of our help, and that's how he was again back into communication. But fortunately, after 40 hours, his electricity came back, and he continued home isolation. So the communication channels must be open 24/7, and you have to take into account these practical issues that some communication may get snapped, or some other problem which will disconnect patients real-time conversation with the doctor. Now this is a case 2. This is snapshot of a WhatsApp chat that we had with the patient, and this patient was having recurrent vomiting. So we asked her to describe what all she is taking, what medication she was taking. I was not aware that she is also taking Ayurvedic treatment from Ayurvedic physician, and she was also taking allopathy medicine. So this we found in one of the patient, and subsequently many patients said that they are also taking other medicines. Uh, so clove and black pepper was also used by many patients, and that we found that associated with vomiting. So the lesson was in our case that cross-check multiple consultation, cross-pathy treatment, or even self-medication for such symptoms which may cause these types of problems. So we'll take this case a little more forward. Now this is a case 3. This was a 56-year-old male hypertensive, and the wife, who was a caretaker, was communicating with us. And around day 5 of the isolation, she shifted under our care from other doctors. So he was running fever, as you can see in the chat, 100 degree of Fahrenheit, and SpO2 borderline 95 still. Has a wisdom teeth pain, but on the morning that day, we changed our protocol the previous that start measuring your after walk oxygen, and started dropping to 92. So this is a case scenario of young hypertensive who is in home isolation, and after walk you notice that his saturation is 92. So what you will do in this case? Please vote if you what you will do in this home isolation case. A young male hypertensive in home isolation, after walk the saturation is 92. So most are saying recheck oxygen level. So that is a good idea of checking, but after 5 days, probably the patient has learned how to check. Admit the patient. Some of the doctors are saying, more doctors are saying admit the patient. Few are asking to recheck. Now more in favor of admission. So we can stop the voting here. That admit the patient is more of a consensus, and so few are saying recheck oxygen level. So definitely, while awaiting your decision, you can always ask the patient to recheck the oxygen, but you cannot neglect it is after walk. So the same patient has probably in the same finger, after walk it is dropping to a 92 level. So we asked this patient to get admitted, and he took some time to find the bed, because this is a very important in this scenario, because that time the bed position was not so good. This patient got bed in a private hospital in the evening, and his saturation dropped further. He was taken on oxygen. He was started on remdesivir. He was given steroids. And after around 12 days of admission in the hospital in the ICU, he was discharged back home. Fortunately, he did not require any ventilator or NIV or any invasive ventilator, and he walked back home perfectly all right. But so this is a signal or a clinical pearl in the home isolation case, that if you find that the oxygen saturation is 92 after a walk or less than 93, you immediately start admission process in such patients. Don't rely on resting SpO2 because resting SpO2 may be normal. Now this is case 4. He's a young male but no comorbidities, and he had recurrence of symptoms on 14th day. Now this patient actually quietly moved out of the city without our knowledge, and he went to his village, and he was communicating from his village with us, and we didn't know that. I thought he was in the city itself. So on 14th day, he had recurrence of symptoms. So this is written in Marathi, but I'll just read this out, that he is now getting again a weakness, he's again getting a cough, he's again getting a rhinorrhea, and he's again getting a headache. But his oxygen saturation even after walk is fairly okay, 95. He's on day 14. And we suggested some investigation because this was a 14th day, and this patient was given 2 to 3 days of steroids previously because he complained of little bit of breathlessness. So we asked for some investigation on day 14. So few patients may complain like this. So what decision you will take regarding continuation of home isolation in case 4? Please vote. There is a recurrence of symptoms on day 14. That is the last day of isolation. Whether to ignore symptoms, prescribe a sedative, treat symptomatically. So advised urgent admission. So there is an equal distribution of the opinion. So we gave Dexa tablet to all our home isolation patients on the day of visit to the wellness center when they were found positive. And this dexamethasone tablet is very important tablet that you should all give to all these patients, because in such emergency, while awaiting admission or further investigation, you can give at least 1 dose of steroid. So I think it is fairly a good decision to give dexamethasone, but continuation of home isolation when the patient has become symptomatic is not a good idea. So our advice in this case was, please seek immediate help from a local physician, because he moved out of Pune into home isolation in a village nearby Pune, where he sought help from a physician. We advised inflammatory markers, again, CT scan, a repeat CT scan. But fortunately, not much of a problem. With 1 tablet of steroids, his symptoms disappeared. But this could be start of a cytokine storm in this patient. So even at the end of second week, if the patient has a recurrence of symptoms, think about a cytokine storm. You should investigate and ask for admission or seek immediate help. So this is continuation of home isolation is not a good idea. This is my personal opinion. So this patient underwent investigation, including a CT scan, but he is all right now. He's cured of the COVID-19 and he's back to his duty. Now this is a case 5. Now this is again a chat from the WhatsApp. So this patient complained of headache on the first day, second day of home isolation. So it was responding to paracetamol. But this headache complaint was recurring every day. So you can see here that she's telling that I'm still having headache. So because we have a virtual clinic around between 7 p.m. 8 p.m. So we made a video call to this patient. She consulted us. Then momentarily the headache went away with simple analgesic, but it kept on recurring even on the next day. But now she started complaining of chakkar. So you can see here she is complaining of giddiness. And we asked for an immediate process. So we'll take a poll on this. So case 5, what action you will take in this patient, a young female in home isolation, having recurring symptom of headache? Continue treating symptomatically or go for a CT scan? Or is it because of some other problem or you want to ask for an MRI? This is academic literature question, but important because this diarrhea is also a very common symptom in COVID. So according to one of the study done in China in some from Italy, that patients of diarrhea having a symptom of diarrhea in COVID is associated with high viral load, and it is associated with family clustering. So it is logical to understand. So because of the high viral load, there are chances of family transmission. So family clustering of cases is associated with diarrhea, and combination of respiratory and GI symptoms suggest a severe disease. So if you have respiratory and a GI symptoms, it suggests a severe disease in COVID-19 patient. So this is the literature so far known in about diarrhea in COVID-19. So important for us is that diarrhea can be because of azithromycin, which was rampantly used because it was there in the guidelines. It is a notorious drug to cause GI upset. HCQS is well known to cause GI upset. Many patients without your knowledge may be taking alternative medicines like what we saw in case number 3. Most of these patients are in quarantine, or sometimes they are ordering food from outside because there's no one to cook in their home. So outside food can also cause acute gastroenteritis, and of course there could be incidental other reasons also. So other than COVID, there could be other causes of diarrhea that you need to decipher and take appropriate action based on the cause found. So this patient was treated symptomatically, and most probably the food in the quarantine center was the reason for her diarrhea. Now, this is another very well discussed, very popular topic of infectiousness and symptom onset. So we have finished the real cases, but we will see what the family transmission, infectiousness and viral load about COVID is. This is a very important diagram from Annals of Internal Medicine. This article was published on September 17, and it tells you about virus transmission. So on the one axis, we have CT value of the RT-PCR, the days relative to symptom onset, starting 5 days prior to symptom onset, and 14-day, and on x-axis we see infectiousness. So you will see that the period of infectiousness starts 2 to 3 days prior to the symptom onset. So highest infectiousness is just 2.5 days before the symptom onset. And then after the onset of symptoms, it rapidly reduces till the 7th day. So the RT-PCR positivity on CT value or viral load and period of infectiousness do not exactly match. And this is a very important diagram to understand why some family members are infected and some may not. And this is a very important article which you all can go through, that the viral load peaks prior to the symptom onset as per one of the systematic review, and that is the most infectious period. So this is the article from Annals, and I'll just give you the highlights of this article, that respiratory transmission is the dominant mode of transmission, and that is also a droplet nuclei. Vertical transmission occurs rarely. Direct contact and fumite transmissions are presumed but are likely only in an unusual mode of transmission. And that is the reason why we should not be insisting on gloves and only go for hand washing repeatedly during our wellness center working. Gloves may not be necessary. They may be necessary in certain situations, like if you are working in ICU where you are handling infected material, then it is of course definitely needed. But in routine OPD consultation, hand washing is sufficient. So this is one of the conclusion from this review. And definitely no other routes of transmission. Fecal respiratory transmission also very rare, that in as per this article. So the important takeaway in this article is fomites less likely. Predominantly it is a respiratory mode of transmission. So what we found in our cases of Wellness Center 5, we had 16 family members where all members were positive. But there were almost equal number of families, only one member was positive. The rest of all the family members were negative on RT-PCR, and nobody became symptomatic. And not all members got positive. Such families where half or less than half family members were positive. Such were 12 families were there. What worked in these family where only one member was positive was a quick isolation by the index case. So those who thought they had COVID-19, they quickly isolated even before the test. So before they came to the wellness center, they started using mask. They got isolated in their house in a separate room, and then they were fully isolated after the positive report. So all well ventilated houses and index case getting quickly isolated saved other family members. So this is very important. So in your family, if anybody feels that he is even a slightest suspicion, immediately isolate, start using mask. It may save other family members. So role of ventilation, very well known. If you have well ventilated house, then probably many of your family members may escape. Currently, no conclusive evidence of fomite or a direct contact transmission in humans. So this is very important. That's why I stopped using gloves. Transmissibility of the virus peaks around a day or two before the symptom onset. Not all families get infected. All family members do not get infected, as seen from our data also. Many will escape the infection. There could be many reasons for that other than infectiousness and ventilation. So most important thing is period of infectiousness is shorter than the positivity duration. This is a very important point. So we come to the concluding part of this presentation. So how one should select home isolation? So watch for any risky symptom. Breathlessness, it's a risky symptom, straight away admission. If the patient has psychiatric illness, is on antidepressant, don't go for home isolation in such case. We had one young daughter who was on an antidepressant. We asked her whether you are confident in home isolation. She said no. And we said, okay, you can go for a quarantine or hospitalization because of her nature of previous illness. Any red flags in the first laboratory reports? As I said, CRP more than 40. If this indicates lot of lung lesion, go for admission early in these patients. If there is any concern in monitoring, logistical issues, family issues, don't select such cases for home isolation. You must do their laboratory reports, and if there are any concern in those laboratory reports during home isolation, based on the progress of symptoms, decide whether to continue or discontinue. So breathlessness, anytime SpO2 below 95 after a walk, CRP more than 40. We also found low albumin, low globulin as indicators for oxygen requirement. Any patient who has intractable or worsening coughing. Coughing is a very common symptom in these patients. But if you feel that a patient's coughing is becoming a predominant symptom, this is an indication that his lung involvement is increasing. We normally ask all patients on phone to do breath count. We ask patient in a single breath, count from 1 to the maximum number in a single breath. If the count is above 40, we can be little comfortable that he has a fair amount of lung capacity left and is not a dangerous patient. Continuation of fever we found in some of the home isolated cases as an indicator for admission and requirement of oxygen. As we said, persistent diarrhea, GI symptoms. If you find a diabetes with an erratic intake, because anorexia is one symptom and they can't ensure same quantity of food, if they are on glimepiride, if they are on insulin, even though the guidelines allow home isolation in such cases, but be careful. If you feel that they are not comfortable in monitoring BSL, you can discontinue. So what is the ideal home isolation that I follow? I won't call ideal, but this is what I think is best. After a diagnosis, call the patient or have the patient in wellness center, do risk assessment. Monitor in home isolation, saturation, pulse rate, temperature, urine output. These are the what given in guidelines. But I suggest that monitor SpO2 after walk and take decision based on that. Monitor single breath count. Monitor coughing frequency. If you have concern, make a video call. So we normally make video call to any patient showing abnormal symptoms, and watch use of accessory muscles on the video. This you can definitely pick up. Monitoring of lab parameters is not given in home isolation cases in the guidelines, but we should monitor between day 5 and day 7 at least a CBC CRP D dimer. There are home collection available now. Take advantage of that and make 2 set of monitoring between day 5, 7 and day 11 and 12, and look at these parameters. If they are bad than the previous ones, then you can decide whether to continue or not. You must have post-discharge plans, because even after a discharge, few patients needed admission because of the complications. So just because the home isolation is over, everything is not finished. There is a lot of work still remaining. So my center is offering a complete package in home isolation. So we have a diagnosis, we do a risk assessment, we have a facility for video consultation between 7 to 8 doctors who participate in this virtual round between 7 p.m. to 8 p.m. depending on the convenience of the patient. You can see few videos of this. And after the patient is recovered from COVID, we are also offering online virtual pulmonary rehabilitation. So you can see this second video, the patient was a young on home oxygen. The second patient was on ventilator for some time, elderly, who required a prolonged ICU admission. So My Wellness Center could offer all these with the help of uh, digital technology and whatever little resources that we have for use at our disposal. And we can organize at wellness center. So we have started since last 2 weeks. We are doing virtual online pulmonary rehabilitation. So we are combining patients who are post-COVID and also regular patients of ILD and COPD. So the patient here on the left side is a severe COPD on home oxygen therapy who is participating from home. Surprisingly, these patients know the technology more than us, and they are able to uh, perform as good as in-person pulmonary rehabilitation. So we show videos, we guide them virtually. We see, after seeing how they perform in the home, and they are able to uh, take advantage of this virtual online pulmonary rehabilitation from CGHS Pune. Uh, we are doing this every Thursday between 7 to 8 p.m. in the evening. If any of your patient wants virtual online pulmonary rehabilitation, they can join freely depending on your own assessment. If they are fit to do so, we'll be happy to assist them in pulmonary rehabilitation. So thank you all for participating. We have some time left for some question answers. I will unmute and we are open for questions. Any questions to Dr. Kamesh Rao regarding his CBC analysis? In a very short period of notice, he has done this analysis, and probably will once the sample size is quite good, we'll ask him to rerun his analysis again. So any questions for Dr. Kamesh? Any question for me? Any doctor wants to add to the presentation? They want to show their slides? Is ESR taken into account from Dr. Anjali Rao? I personally don't advise ESR. We rely more on the CRP value and D-dimer value to take decision on whether to continue home isolation, whether the patient is going to require admission or oxygen. So I don't personally advise ESR as an important investigation. CRP is more important because ESR can be raised in many situations. CRP is little more specific than ESR, although both are inflammatory markers. Yeah, hemogram, because not all laboratories give ESR readings in the hemogram. Only few labs are giving ESR as a part of the investigation. At least in my city. So ESR was not taken, but obviously it will be raised in these patients. Anybody else wants to ask question?
Hello.
Yeah,
I need
Dr.
to
Srinivas.
add
Yes,
a
sir.
couple of points. Like
Yes, sir.
one is, not all test results they go in parallel. Sometimes we have discordance between CRPs and then ferritin levels. I don't find, all of them going in same direction. We had a recent case, one, wherein ferritin was high, D-dimer was normal, LDH was slightly raised, but CRP was negative, like less than 6. On follow-up, his ferritins and LDH were slightly raised, but CRP rose from less than 6 to more than 20, 25. And then he had persistent cough. He is a post-CABG patient. He's a young, like less than 60 years. So I would rather suggest follow-up, as you already suggested, on 5th or 11th or 14 days in persons who continue to have persistent symptoms. We need to follow up with the test results. Initially, they may be negative. They may increase over a period. And all of them need not go in a similar direction. Like, that's one thing I would like.
Yeah,
I don't know whether you have observed or not.
Yeah, there is a reason for this, sir. There is a reason for this. The CRP starts rising in 6 to 12 hours time, and it peaks at 48, 72 hours. So there will be some delay reflecting in CRP. Obviously, the symptom would appear first. And the CRP.
My patient, my patient already was symptomatic for 3-4 days. Like,
all right.
Yeah, that's one thing. Another thing is 3 or 4 patients of like recently we have seen, they were complaining of excessive sleepiness.
Yeah.
I don't know whether you have observed that or not. I couldn't explain. Why they were their saturations were normal. This includes persons between 50 to 60 years of age, one around 70 plus. They specifically told me that they are feeling drowsy, yawning, and then falling excessively sleepy.
Yeah.
So I asked them, like, they were not on any sedatives or anything like that. Was it due to the COVID or?
Yeah. Okay.
I thought we were giving Fabiflu, probably whether I thought whether it would be Fabiflu which is causing that, but I found among the side effects I couldn't explain. That.
Yeah, this is one of the important side effect of drugs also, but sleepiness or profound fatigue, where the patient feels that he should lie down and should not get up. This is one of the symptoms suggest severity of COVID-19. And definitely what you have observed that this symptom should be also watched with suspicion. There is one question, very nice question actually. Dr. Sudhamati, patient with low HB and normal inflammatory markers, are they fit for home isolation to assess by SpO2? Definitely, we had one patient. If we look at the hemoglobin dissociation curve, the content of oxygen, it also depends on the hemoglobin concentration. So if you have a very low hemoglobin, even though patient is showing a normal SpO2, the actual oxygen content in the blood may be low. And if you have a very severe anemia, say less than 7, this patient should not, means ideally he should be in the hospital or a quarantine center, because the SpO2 would not be a reliable, and we have to know why he has anemia. We lost one young patient who had a severe anemia, 4 hemoglobin, and he was admitted in emergency. He was a serving employee. He was brought in a very bad condition to one of the tertiary care center, and he died within hours of admission. But he had hemorrhoids and his HB on admission was 4. he lost his life. Probably the hemoglobin factor was not taken into account. He was, of course, he was not in home isolation, or he was not under us, but this was a case of a serving employee because of anemia complicating his COVID-19. So very good question. A low hemoglobin, and that is the importance of knowing comorbidities before the patient goes into home isolation. Just based on RT-PCR, you should never ever advise home isolation alone. We all know that how good the patients observe their symptoms and incidental detection of many comorbidities during routine health checkup. Good point. Thank you, Dr. Sudhamati.
Another thing is the reason why a CBC, a D-dimer, and a CRP are enough to follow up following up the patients in home isolation is because CRP generally it parallels with the inflammation. Like the more the inflammation, the greater is the CRP. And D-dimer, it indicates some thrombosis which is going on. So these again, inflammation and thromboinflammation, thrombosis, these are the two main pathological features of COVID. So with these two simple investigations, following them up in home isolation, they will guide us to treat with steroid, and also whether we need to add anticoagulation. These two things are enough to what we call guide our treatment.
So we come to the concluding part of this presentation. I'll just name a few clinical. Dr. Kamesh, you want to say something?
Yeah, I just want to add something Dr. Srinivas Kumar mentioned. All the parameters won't go in the same direction. So I just want to add that this is where exactly the mathematical models will come into picture. They just look at a combination of parameters, and then they can predict either the status of the patient or even the prognosis of the case by looking at a combination of factors taken together. So I just want to add that point, like if we have enough number of samples, we can definitely build some mathematical models that will give at least up to 85 to 90% accuracy, which way the patient is progressing. So just want to make a point on that.
Thank you, Dr. Rao. So the concluding remarks I would make that don't send any patient in home isolation without doing a risk assessment and basic labs and assessing their comorbidities. There may be hidden comorbidities. Monitor respiratory parameters in home isolation. If possible, do home laboratory monitoring of these home isolated patients by calling lab personnel for home collection. Have a plan ready, give all patients of home isolation a dexamethasone tablet to be taken in emergency only, not for routine use. Because at the time of emergency, this one single tablet might do some good work before the patient finds a bed in emergency. And have post-COVID plans ready, or at least guide the patient where they are available. Online pulmonary rehabilitation is possible with some limitations. We are conducting it. There could be further scope for these facilities to be incorporated in our system. And patients are able to use these facilities from their home in our system. So with these concluding remarks, I say goodbye to you, good night, and thank you for participating. And I thank you, Dr. Rao, Dr. Sudhamati, Dr. Srinivas for adding points and asking good questions. Thank you. Good night.
So it was a nice presentation. Thank you.
Thank you.